The knife went in again. 7 times now. Marcus Rodriguez felt his life bleeding out onto the Afghan rocks, but 20 feet away, Danny Chin was still breathing. That was all that mattered. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Marcus Rodriguez had always been different from the other kids in his neighborhood. While they dreamed of becoming football stars or rock musicians, Marcus dreamed of wearing the uniform. He grew up in a small town in Texas where the American flag flew proudly in every yard, where military service wasn't just respected, it was expected. His father, Carlos, had served in the Gulf War. His grandfather, Miguel, had fought in Vietnam. The Rodriguez family had a tradition of service that ran as deep as their roots in the desert soil of West Texas. But for Marcus, it wasn't about tradition. It was about something deeper. "Why do you want to be a Marine, son?" the recruiter had asked him on that hot July day when Marcus walked into the recruiting office, fresh out of high school. Marcus had looked the man straight in the eye. "Because someone has to stand between the wolves and the sheep, sir. I'd rather be the one holding the line." The recruiter had smiled. He'd heard 1,000 reasons why young men wanted to join the Corps. But there was something in this kid's eyes, a quiet strength, a determination that couldn't be taught. Marcus wasn't the biggest guy in his boot camp class. At 5'8" and 160 pounds, he looked more like a college student than a warrior. But what he lacked in size he made up for in heart. His drill instructors noticed it first, the way he never left a man behind during training runs, how he shared his rations with struggling recruits, the fierce loyalty he showed to his brothers in arms. "Rodriguez has something special," drill instructor Sergeant Williams had written in his evaluation. "He's not just a Marine. He's what every Marine should aspire to be." By the time Marcus deployed to Afghanistan, he had earned the respect of every man in his unit. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, he'd been promoted twice in 3 years, was known for 2 things: his ability to keep his men safe and his unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home. Private First Class Danny Chen was the newest member of their squad. 19 years old, scared, and 3,000 miles from his family in California, Danny looked up to Marcus like a big brother. Marcus had taken the young Marine under his wing from day one. "Stay close to me, Chin," Marcus had told him during their first patrol. "I'll teach you everything you need to know to make it home to your family." Danny's parents had immigrated from China when he was 5. They ran a small restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, working 18-hour days to give their son the opportunities they never had. Danny was their pride and joy, the first in his family to graduate high school, the first to serve his adopted country. "I want to make them proud," Danny had confided to Marcus one evening as they sat watching the sunset over the Afghan mountains. "You already have," Marcus had replied. "Just by being here, by wearing that uniform, you've made them proud." The 2 men had formed an unbreakable bond. Marcus saw something of his younger self in Danny, the same desire to serve, the same fierce love of country. And Danny saw in Marcus the kind of man he hoped to become. October 15th started like any other day in the war zone. The morning briefing was routine: intelligence reports, weather conditions, patrol routes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But war has a way of turning ordinary moments into life-changing events in the blink of an eye. The convoy was returning from a supply run to a forward operating base when the attack began. The first explosion sent their vehicle careening off the road and into a ditch. Marcus felt his head slam against the window, stars exploding behind his eyes. "Contact left. Contact left," someone was shouting over the radio. The world erupted in chaos. Gunfire cracked through the air like deadly fireworks. The acrid smell of smoke and burning fuel filled Marcus's nostrils. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear his men calling out positions, coordinating their defense. But something was wrong. Someone was missing from the radio chatter. "Chin. Danny, report." Marcus called into his radio. Silence. Marcus looked around frantically and saw Danny's motionless form 30 yards away, near the wreckage of the lead vehicle. The young Marine was alive. Marcus could see his chest rising and falling, but he wasn't moving. Blood was pooling beneath his head. The enemy fire was intense. Bullets whined overhead, striking the rocks around them with sharp cracks. Getting to Danny would mean crossing open ground with no cover. It would be suicide. Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'm going for Chin," he radioed to his squad leader. "Negative, Rodriguez. Too much fire. Wait for support." But Marcus was already moving. Time seemed to slow as Marcus sprinted across the killing field. He could feel the heat of bullets passing inches from his body. The ground exploded in little puffs of dust where enemy rounds struck. His lungs burned as he pushed himself harder than he'd ever run before. 20 yards. 15.10. He dove the last few feet, sliding across the rocky ground to reach Danny's side. The young Marine was unconscious, blood streaming from a head wound. But he was breathing. "I've got you, brother," Marcus whispered, checking Danny for other injuries. "I've got you." That's when he saw them. 3 enemy fighters had flanked around behind the convoy. They were moving through the rocks, trying to get a better angle on Marcus's squad. If they succeeded, his brothers would be caught in a crossfire. Marcus made a split-second decision. He couldn't carry Danny and fight at the same time. But he could buy his squad time to reposition. He raised his rifle and opened fire. The first enemy fighter went down immediately. The second dove for cover behind a boulder. The third had a knife. Marcus didn't see him coming until it was too late. The man had circled around, using the rocky terrain to mask his approach. Marcus spun to face the new threat, but the enemy was already lunging forward. The first stab caught Marcus in the shoulder, the blade sliding between his ribs like ice water. Pain exploded through his body, but his training kicked in. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, trying to control the weapon. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the rocky ground. The enemy fighter was bigger than Marcus, heavier, with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. But Marcus had something the other man didn't. He had Danny Chin lying unconscious just a few feet away, and he'd be damned if he was going to let his brother die. The second stab caught Marcus in the side. The third in his leg. Each time the blade found flesh, Marcus felt his strength ebbing away. But each time he thought of Danny. He thought of the young Marine's parents back in San Francisco, waiting for their son to come home. He thought of all the letters Danny had written but never sent, all the dreams he'd shared during their quiet conversations. "Not today. You're not taking him today." With a surge of adrenaline born from pure determination, Marcus managed to get his hands on the attacker's throat. The enemy fighter stabbed him again, the 4th time, then the 5th. Marcus could feel his vision starting to tunnel, could taste blood in his mouth. But he held on. The 6th stab nearly finished him. The blade pierced deep into his chest, missing his heart by inches. Marcus felt his strength leaving him like water from a broken dam. His grip on the enemy's throat loosened. The attacker raised the knife for what would surely be the killing blow. Marcus tried to lift his arms to defend himself, but they felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. "This is it. This is how it ends." But then he heard it, Danny's voice, weak but conscious. "Staff Sergeant, behind you." With the last of his strength, Marcus rolled aside just as the knife came down. Instead of finding his heart, the blade, the 7th and final stab, caught him in the shoulder. The enemy fighter, thrown off balance by Marcus's movement, stumbled forward. Marcus grabbed a rock with his left hand and brought it up with everything he had left. The sound it made connecting with the attacker's skull was sickening but final. The world went quiet after that. The gunfire had stopped. Marcus's squad had eliminated the remaining threats. All he could hear was his own ragged breathing and the sound of his blood dripping onto the rocks beneath him. Rodriguez, stay with me." It was Corporal Jackson, his squad's medic. Marcus tried to focus on the man's face, but everything kept sliding in and out of focus. "Danny?" Marcus whispered. "Chen's alive. He's hurt but he's alive. You saved him, Staff Sergeant. You saved him." Marcus closed his eyes and smiled. The pain was starting to fade now, replaced by a strange floating sensation. He could hear the helicopter coming, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of rotor blades cutting through the thin mountain air. Medevac, he thought. Thank God. But would it be in time? As the medical team worked frantically to stabilize him, Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness. He saw flashes, Danny being loaded onto a stretcher, his eyes open now, looking scared but alert. Jackson holding pressure on Marcus's wounds, his hands covered in blood. The inside of the helicopter, with medics working over him like his life depended on it. Which it did. "Don't you dare quit on me, Rodriguez," one of the medics was shouting. "Your Marines need you to fight." Fight. Yes, he could do that. He'd been fighting his whole life, fighting to make his family proud, fighting to earn his place among the Marines, fighting to keep his brothers safe. He could fight a little longer. The next few hours were a blur of surgery and intensive care. Marcus flatlined twice on the operating table, his heart stopping as the surgeons worked to repair the damage from 7 knife wounds. Each time the medical team managed to bring him back. "He's a fighter," one of the doctors said. "I've never seen someone lose this much blood and keep fighting." But Marcus wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for Danny, for his squad, for everyone who was counting on him to come home. He was fighting because that's what Marines do, They never give up, they never surrender, and they never leave a man behind. 3 days later, Marcus woke up in a hospital in Germany. The first thing he saw was Danny Chin sitting in a chair beside his bed, his head bandaged but his eyes clear and bright. "Hey, Staff Sergeant," Danny said softly. "How you feeling?" Marcus tried to speak but his throat was too dry. Danny quickly held a cup of water to his lips, helping him take small sips. "Like I got stabbed 7 times, Marcus finally managed to croak, and Danny laughed, the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. "You saved my life," Danny said, his voice thick with emotion. "The doc said if you hadn't gotten to me when you did, I would have bled out. And if you hadn't taken out those fighters." "That's what we do," Marcus said simply. "We take care of our own." The doctors said Marcus would live, but his fighting days were over. The wounds had been too severe, the damage too extensive. He would be medically retired from the Corps, sent home to heal and try to build a new life. The news hit Marcus harder than any of the knife wounds had. The Marines were his life, his identity, his purpose. Who was he if he wasn't a Marine? "You'll always be a Marine," Danny said as if reading his thoughts. "Some things don't change just because you take off the uniform." Coming home. 2 months later, Marcus was back in his hometown in Texas, living with his parents while he recovered. The physical wounds were healing but the emotional ones ran deeper. He felt lost, purposeless. The transition from warrior to civilian was harder than any battle he'd ever fought. His mother, Elena, tried to keep his spirits up. She cooked his favorite meals, invited his old friends over, even suggested he might want to go back to school. But Marcus just sat on the front porch most days, staring out at the empty street, wondering what came next. The nightmares came every night. Not about getting stabbed, that part didn't bother him. But about Danny, about all the Marines still fighting overseas, about the brothers he'd left behind. He felt like he'd abandoned them, even though everyone told him he'd done his duty and more. The letters helped a little. Danny wrote every week, updating Marcus on the squad, sharing news from the front lines. Other Marines from their unit wrote too, thanking him for what he'd done, telling him he was a hero. But Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He felt broken. That's how he was feeling on the morning of December 15th, exactly 2 months after the attack. He was sitting on the porch in his robe and pajamas, drinking coffee and trying to summon the energy to face another empty day. That's when he heard the sound. At first he thought it might be construction work, a rhythmic thumping sound like boots on pavement. But as it got closer, Marcus realized what it was. Marching feet. A lot of them. Marcus stood up slowly, his still healing wounds protesting the movement. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked down the street. What he saw took his breath away. At the end of the block, a formation of Marines was marching toward his house. Not 10 or 20 Marines. Not even 50. 100 Marines in perfect formation, their dress blue uniforms immaculate, their white gloves spotless, their bearing proud and strong. Marcus's hand went to his chest, where his heart was suddenly pounding. He could hear his mother gasp behind him, could hear his father's sharp intake of breath. The formation was led by a colonel Marcus didn't recognize, but the face beside him was familiar. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, Marcus's old battalion commander. Behind them, rank upon rank of Marines marched in perfect step. As they drew closer, Marcus could see faces he recognized. There was Sergeant Williams, his old drill instructor. There was Captain Torres from his first deployment. There was Jackson, the medic who had saved his life. And there, in the front rank, was Danny Chin. The formation halted in front of Marcus's house with a precision that would have made the drill instructors at boot camp proud. The silence that followed was deafening. Colonel Morrison stepped forward and saluted. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "By order of the Commandant of the Marine Corps, these Marines have come to pay tribute to one of their own." Marcus tried to salute back, but his hands were shaking too badly. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he didn't care who saw them. "Sir, I don't understand," he managed to say. "You do understand," Colonel Morrison replied. "You understand what it means to be a Marine. You understand what it means to put your brothers before yourself. You understand what honor looks like." The colonel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small blue box. Inside was a medal Marcus had only seen in pictures. The Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor that could be awarded to a Marine. "For extraordinary heroism in combat," the colonel read from a citation. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty. But Marcus wasn't listening to the words anymore. He was looking at the faces of the 100 Marines standing in formation before his house. Young faces and old faces, faces he knew and faces he didn't, but all bearing the same expression: respect, admiration, brotherhood. These men had come from bases all across the country. Some had taken leave they couldn't afford. Others had driven through the night. All had come because they'd heard about what Marcus had done, and they wanted him to know that he hadn't been forgotten. Present arms. Colonel Morrison commanded. 100 Marines raised their hands in salute, and the morning sun caught their white gloves like a field of stars. Marcus tried to salute back, tried to stand at attention the way he'd been trained. But his legs gave out and he sank to his knees on the porch, overwhelmed by emotion. That's when Danny Chin broke from formation. The young Marine ran up the porch steps and knelt beside Marcus, wrapping his arms around the man who had saved his life. "Thank you," Danny whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." One by one the other Marines broke formation too. They came up the steps, each one shaking Marcus's hand, each one saying something different but meaning the same thing. "You are not forgotten. You are not alone. Once a Marine, always a Marine." Later that day, after the Marines had gone and the street was quiet again, Marcus sat in his room holding a letter. It had been delivered with the medal, and it bore the seal of the Commandant of the Marine Corps. "Dear Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a Marine's greatest honor is not the medals he wears or the ranks he achieves. It is the knowledge that when the moment came when his brothers needed him most, he did not hesitate. He did not falter. He stood up and did what needed to be done. You have brought honor to the Corps and to the uniform you wore. But more than that, you have shown the world what it truly means to be a Marine. Semper Fidelis, General David H. Berger, Commandant of the Marine Corps." Marcus read the letter 3 times before setting it aside. Outside his window, he could see his father in the yard, carefully folding the American flag that had been presented to Marcus along with his medal. His mother knocked on the door. "Marcus, honey? There's someone here to see you." Downstairs, a young man in civilian clothes was waiting in the living room. Marcus recognized him immediately. It was Corporal Peterson, one of the Marines from his old squad. But something was different about him. He looked lost. "Staff Sergeant," Peterson said, standing as Marcus entered the room. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I heard about today about the ceremony." "Of course not," Marcus said. "How are you doing, Peterson?" The young Marine's composure cracked. "Not good, Staff Sergeant. Not good at all. I got out last month and I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a civilian. I keep thinking maybe I made a mistake, maybe I should have stayed in." Marcus recognized the look in Peterson's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in his own mirror for the past 2 months. "Sit down," Marcus said. "Let's talk." They talked for hours. About the war, about coming home, about trying to find purpose in a world that seemed to have moved on without them. And slowly Marcus began to understand something. The 100 Marines who had come to his house that morning hadn't just been honoring him. They had been reminding him of something he'd forgotten, that being a Marine wasn't just about wearing the uniform. It was about taking care of your brothers, whether they were in combat or struggling to adjust to civilian life. 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of a small building in downtown San Antonio. The sign above the door read, "Warriors Way, Veterans Support Center." It wasn't much to look at from the outside, but inside, it was something special. Marcus had used his disability compensation and some donations from fellow Marines to open the center. It was a place where veterans could come to talk, to get help with job searches, to just be around people who understood what they'd been through. Peterson was there every day helping to run the programs. Danny Chin visited whenever he was on leave, sharing his story with younger veterans who were struggling with the transition home. "You know what the best part is?" Danny said one afternoon as they watched a group of veterans working together on a job training exercise. "What's that?" Marcus asked. "You're still saving people. You just don't need a uniform to do it anymore." Marcus smiled. For the first time since he'd come home, he felt like he had a purpose again. The nightmares were getting better. The wounds were healing inside and out. That evening, as Marcus was locking up the center, he found an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a handwritten note from a young veteran he'd been counseling. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I just wanted you to know that you saved my life again today. Not from enemy fire this time, but from something just as dangerous. The feeling that I was alone, that nobody understood, that maybe it would be easier to just give up. Thank you for showing me that there's still a mission for guys like us. Thank you for proving that once a Marine, always a Marine. Semper Fi. Lance Corporal Sarah Martinez." Marcus folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. Tomorrow there would be more veterans to help, more lives to touch, more opportunities to serve. The uniform was gone, but the Marine remained. 5 years later, Marcus stood at the podium of a packed auditorium, looking out at an audience of Marines, veterans, and military families. He was the keynote speaker at the annual Marine Corps birthday ball, invited to share his story with a new generation of warriors. "People ask me all the time if I regret what happened that day in Afghanistan," he said. "If I regret charging across that open ground, if I regret the wounds I took, if I regret ending my military career to save one man." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "The answer is simple. I would do it again tomorrow. Because that's what Marines do. We take care of our own. We never leave a man behind. And we never ever give up." In the front row, Danny Chin sat with his wife and newborn son. The baby's middle name was Marcus. "The Corps taught me that courage isn't about being fearless," Marcus continued. "It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. It's about putting your brothers before yourself. It's about standing up when everyone else sits down." He touched the Navy Cross pin to his dress blue uniform, the same uniform he'd been allowed to wear again for special occasions like this. "I got stabbed 7 times that day. But I also got something much more valuable. I got to see what real brotherhood looks like. I got to see 100 Marines march down my street to tell me I wasn't forgotten. I got to learn that being a Marine isn't about the uniform you wear, it's about the values you carry in your heart." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it. He was thinking about all the veterans he'd helped at the center, all the lives that had been saved not by bullets and knives, but by friendship and understanding. The warrior's mission never ended. It just took different forms. And somewhere in the crowd, a young Marine was listening, learning what it truly meant to be part of something bigger than himself. Learning that the greatest honor wasn't in the medals you earned, but in the lives you touched. Learning what it meant to be a Marine. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful.